Our questions tonight come from Exodus chapter 34. Exodus chapter 34. Let's see who studied today. What were they not to make for themselves? Molded gods, right? They'd already failed at that once, hadn't they? They'd already made that golden calf, and of course God had told them, you don't have any other gods, right? No other gods. So they were not to make any gods of any kind of idols. And obviously that's going to be a trip up for Israel for the rest of their history, isn't it? Started right there at the foot of Mount Sinai while Moses was up on Mount Sinai with Aaron, and it's going to continue. But God's request is that they not make any for themselves. In Exodus 34, we learned that there was some feasts to be observed annually. And we are told that every male is to appear before the Lord how many times? 3 times in a what? In a year. Very good. 3 times every year. So every male was to bring himself before the Lord. That would obviously be at the tabernacle and be through the high priest, through Aaron and his sons, and in observation of these feasts throughout the year, they were strategically planned. There were 3 of them, and they were to appear before the Lord each time. And so 3 times a year. Toward the end of Exodus 34, Aaron and all the children of Israel, they saw Moses and they became afraid. Why were they afraid of him? His face was shining, right? Because his face shone. You remember, he got to see the back of God, and apparently I don't know, some people have described it as a glow, I don't know what was going on his face, but it was shining in some form or fashion, and when the people saw it, they recognized that it was much different. I was talking to the kids this afternoon, and I said, the only thing I know to compare it to for us is like, you can tell when somebody's seen the sun, can't you? Or when the sun's seen them, right? You can tell when that time's about to come, because the sun's getting a little closer, and some of you are itching to get outside, and there's going to be some red faces coming here before long. And we're going to all get blistered, right? Well, I don't know what happened to Moses, but something of that fashion, he appeared as though he was shining in some way. And because of that, they were afraid of him and scared because it was something they had never seen, and rightfully so. This morning we dealt with the good seed. In Luke chapter 8 and verse 8, the Bible just simply says that the seed that was planted in the good soil, just says that the good soil yielded 100-fold. When we backed up into Mark 4 and looked at that, Mark said there were some occasions where some bared 30-fold, and some bared 60-fold, and some bared 100-fold. We come back into Matthew 13 and his explanation of the good soil, and he gave us the same numbers, but he gave them in reverse order if you were here this morning. Matthew said there was some that yielded 100, and others that yielded 60, and others that yielded 30. Tonight I want us to just kind of dig a little deeper into this idea of, maybe you've heard somebody say, well, I'm a 30-fold Christian. Well, maybe you are. Or maybe the next person would say, well, maybe I'm a 60-fold Christian. Of course, we would all be very skeptical to say I'm a 100-fold Christian, because that would almost sound like arrogance and pride, wouldn't it? But you better believe there's some 100-fold Christians, okay? They may not be as bold to say that, but you better believe there are some. So what's the point of the various levels, if you will. I want you to go to Matthew 13 with me. Let's start there. Well, let's think about this for just a moment tonight. And Matthew 13, this is Matthew's account of the parable there. Of course, Jesus gives the parable in all three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then there's this interruption. And I want to look at, and we've looked at this before, but I want to take you back to it. In verse 10 of Matthew 13, the disciples interrupt him and said, why are you speaking to us in parables? And then that's when Jesus goes into this explanation. And from Mark's account, we learn that if you don't get this parable, you can't understand any of the other. This one's paramount to understanding the rest of them, Jesus says. And it's in this interruption or in this break in the explanation, if you will, of the parable that Jesus says in verse 12, for to the one who has, more will be given, and he will have in an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. Now, Matthew 13 and verse 12 has always been perplexing to me, because it almost sounds like, what's our world, what's our society, what's our government built on today? The rich getting richer and the poor getting poor, right? That's almost what Matthew 13:12 sounds like to me. I mean, it sounds like the government's figured it out. Where those who have, they just get more and they get it abundantly. So the rich get richer. And those who have not, even what they have, they get it taken away, so the poor get poor. And we have this greater divide and greater divide and greater divide between the rich and the poor. If you read Matthew 13 and verse 12 at its face value, you could walk away with that, couldn't you? Well, when you drop down into the explanation of the parable beginning in verse 18, and you come down to verse 23, and here's the good soil, and it's those who hear and understand, and they bear fruit and yield. And then you've got one with 100-fold, another with 60, and another with 30. And immediately you think, oh boy, well, we've got classifications of Christians going on here. Well, this is real good. That means that some of you are more important than some others of you. Right? I mean, some of you, surely the 100-fold people, we got to really take good care of them and rally around them and support them. And, you know, if we're going to lose a few of you guys, well, let's just lose the 30-fold people, you know? We don't really ever miss them anyway. I mean, they're the seed that just, they did a little, but, we'll do without them. They'll leave the church and we won't ever know they're gone. We won't ever know they're missing. But now, a 100-fold Christian, oh boy, I don't know, we may have to shut the doors if they leave. Now you may think I'm being funny, but you'd be lying to yourself if you didn't think people think like that. And you might be one of them that thinks like that. And here's how it works. Well, I don't do very much. Well, I don't matter very much. I mean, if I just quit going, the church wouldn't ever notice it that I'm not there. I'm just a 30-fold Christian. The opposite side of that is people who think, well, I'm a 100-fold Christian, and I'm going to tell you what, if this church down here, if they didn't have me, I don't know what they'd do. This wouldn't get done, and that wouldn't get done, and that wouldn't get done. They just had closed doors, I guess. And you got those two extremes of possibility. Let me be very clear with you tonight that the only way I know to see this is the 30-fold Christian is just as approved as the 100-fold Christian. Don't miss it. Jesus didn't say, well, now there was some good ground out there, but there was some better ground among the good ground, and the better ground among the good ground yielded 100-fold, and the poor ground of the good ground only yielded 30, but it still yielded some, and so we'll consider it. No, he said there was some good ground. And the seed that fell among the good ground, some of the seed yielded. And I mentioned this morning that that the soil is uniform in kind, but it is different in talent and ability. Now let me be very clear about this. I don't believe for a moment that a 100-fold Christian is going to get into heaven on 30-fold. Are you listening? I don't believe a 100-fold Christian is going to get to heaven on 30-fold. Nor do I believe that a 30-fold Christian is going to miss heaven because they can't be 100-fold. Now what's the difference there? What's the point? The reality of it is, flip over in your Bible to Matthew 25. You know, I thought about this parable, and we're not covering it this year in our parable, so it made a good one for me to pull from for tonight to illustrate this to you. In Matthew 25, there's about 3 paragraphs there to that chapter, but the one that interests us is in the middle of the 3. And Wade began to read it a while ago, and there was a man who was going to go on a journey, and he handed out some talents. You know this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. To one man he gave 5, to one man he gave 2, and to the other he gave 1. Well, I don't know about you, but if I'm standing there and I'm the 1-talent man, I'm thinking, man, I mean, this guy got 5. This guy got 2, you know, best case scenario, he got double than what I got, and worst case scenario, he got 5 times what I got. I mean, I see this 1-talent man standing there going, you know, I'm just a 30-fold Christian. I don't really matter to the church. If I left, I wouldn't be missed. Everything would go on just as if I never was there in the first place. I'm just a 1-talent Christian. Now, according to verse 15, he gave to each one, if you were listening to Wade, he gave to each one according to their ability. Now, this is not favoritism here. This is not showing prejudice or priority or cliques or a special friendship or relationship. This is all based, according to verse 15, on ability. And it would be crazy for us tonight not to admit that there are some talents and abilities that all of us have. And there are some talents and abilities that some of you have that I don't have. One of the greatest blessings about serving the Lord is finding what my abilities are and allowing the Lord to mold and to help me increase in those abilities. Did you catch it this morning that some of the seed, according to Mark's account in Mark 4, as it fell in the good ground, it sprang forth and it was increasing. The beauty of this is, as a 1-talent, if that's the ability that I've got, as a 30-fold Christian, if that's the talent and ability set that I have been given, I want to use it entirely, fully to the glory of God. I want to use it up. I want to wear it out. Whatever that 1 talent, 1 ability is, I want to wear it out and increase it to grow in service to the Lord. I don't look at you and go, Well, poor, poor, pitiful me. You got 5. I only got 1. That's missing the entire point. Nor is it the case that on Judgment Day, I don't see this at all, us going in, dragging our bags, going, well, how much did you get? You know, I never picked cotton a day in my life, but I understand there was a lot of competition going on in the cotton field. A lot of bags were filled trying to see who could fill them the quickest. I did pick peas one time in my life, and we did try to figure out, and I figured out that if you don't press them down in a 5-gallon bucket, you'll get the 5-gallon bucket full a lot quicker until you get to Granddaddy and he pushes them down, and then it doesn't look like you got nothing, right? I just don't see us going in on Judgment Day dragging our 5-gallon buckets of purple hull peas going, Lord, look at me. I got 3 buckets. Adam's only got 1 bucket. Aren't you glad I showed up? Because if we was all trying to eat off of Adam's 1 bucket of peas, we'd get hungry. Aren't you glad I'm here? I got 3. But I don't see that. You don't think like that. I know better than that. So what is the point? What is the emphasis? What is the goal in trying to use our talents and abilities? The man goes away. You know the story. It unfolds, and for time's sake, I'll unfold it very quickly. He comes back. You know what happened? I'm going to drop down to verse 24 for time's sake. And here's the 1-talent man. The 5-talent man, he had 10. 2-talent man, he had 4. Verse 24, here comes the 1-talent man. And he says, Master, I knew you were a hard man. I knew you could reap where you did not sow and gather where you had scattered no seed. Now, from a guy who's just studied the parable of the sower and gone through these 4 types of ground, I'm thinking in my mind, you know, when you sow seed, it's only productive 25% of the time, right? That's not very good odds. Let's just be honest, okay? I mean, we're looking for more than a 25% yield on anything we do, all right? I mean, 1/4 is just... that's a lot of effort only to get a 1/4 return out of it. And this is when you go scattering the seed. The 1-talent man says, I know you get a harvest where you ain't even scattered. You see how impossible that would be? I mean, for even when you do scatter, you don't get a harvest out of, you can't reap out of 3/4 of where you do scatter, because it ends up dying or being trampled or whatever. He says, I know you. You gather where you haven't scattered seed. And so I was afraid. Man, I love it in verse 25. I was afraid. Do you realize that the 1-talent man looked at the master and he said, it's your fault that I hid the talent because I was scared of you. Boy, that going to be great. Here's what's going to happen on Judgment Day. You're going to walk in and you're going to say, God, I was terrified of you, so I did nothing. And God, just like this master, as the passage unfolds, if you knew that, right? I mean, the man just admitted to knowing, hey, guy, I know you're a hard man and you reap where you ain't sown. And so in verse 26, his master says, if you knew that, if you really were afraid of me, as though he's trying to make excuses to say, it's your fault, not my fault. I just really want to be standing around. I really want to be there on Judgment Day when somebody gets brash enough to look at God and say, God, it's your fault. I don't know that that's going to happen. I sure don't see any reason for it happening. But can you imagine being there on Judgment Day and somebody walking up and God saying, depart from me, I never knew you, and them looking at the master and saying, what do you mean? It's your fault that I'm not saved, not my fault. Oh, we live in a world where it's everybody else's fault, right? It amazes me how many people's fault it can be. We didn't start that world. Adam started that world, right? Well, we didn't create that system where you blame everybody else. Adam created that system in the Garden of Eden. Remember what he said to God? He said, God, it's your fault, not my fault. You gave her to me. If you hadn't gave her to me, she would never eat of the fruit. It's your fault, not mine. And we've been playing that game ever since. Sir, I was afraid of you. So I did nothing. It's your fault because you've terrified me. And he says, you know what? If you really knew who I was, you would have at least taken it and invested it, and at my coming, I could have at least had the interest from it. In verse 25 up there, can you see the one-talent man saying, Sir, here's what you gave me. I have what you gave me. Here it is. Almost as if to say in celebration, I didn't lose it. I didn't waste it. I still got it. It's all right here together. Do you really want to go into Judgment Day, and when God asks what you've done with the talents and abilities He's given you, do you really want to say, well, I really hadn't done anything, but here it is? Can you imagine the expression of God to think, I gave you that talent and ability for 50, 60, 70 years, and you did nothing with it? And you're standing there like as if to say, aren't you glad I brought it with me? And God's saying, the least you could have done. If you had just used it a little bit, it would have returned a little. Here you have wasted it. Here you have rendered it valueless, useless, worthless, vain. And so verse 28, you know what happens. He takes that one talent, the master does, from the man, and he gives it to the 10-talent man. And then in verse 29, it sounds almost like Matthew 13 and verse 12. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And it's passive voice and it's future tense, will be taken away, will be given. In other words, you're not doing or taking or receiving anything. It's being done to you. It's passive voice. Those who have, more will be given. They'll have an abundance. Those who have not, even what they have, will be taken away. What's just happened? The one-talent man has lost what he had, didn't he? Now, let's just be quite honest. He didn't have as much as the 5-talent man had when they started, right? And then when the journey's over for the master, he's standing there with 1, while the 5-talent man standing there with 10. He don't even begin to measure up at this point. And he knows out of fear, he's went and hid the talent and done nothing with it. It's at the conclusion of that parable, that context, what's just happened is the one who had little and used it not, lost it. And it was given to the one who had much and had used what he had to even profit more. If you don't use it, you'll lose it, they say. It's a biblical principle. It doesn't say that book, chapter, and verse, but that's what's going on here. And the principle is in Scripture over and over. It's in Matthew chapter 4. It's in Luke chapter 8. Listen to what Luke chapter 8 and verse 18 has to say. Luke 8 and verse 18. Take care then how you hear. Remember what Jesus, when he closed the parable, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. If you're not sick of the phrase, and they heard the word, I'm sick of it, okay? Because it's mentioned in every soul, right? And as we've gone through one by one, what we've seen is that sometimes, like this morning, in the good soul, it's mentioned in all three passages. All Matthew, Mark, and Luke mention specifically to hear the word. That the good soul are seed that heard, hearts that heard the word. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Luke 8 and verse 18, take care then how you hear, for to the one who has, more will be given. And from the one that has not, even what he thinks that he has will be taken away. What he thinks that he has. You see, Luke gives this opportunity for there to be some type of false belief even within the Christian. He thinks he has, but even what he thinks he has, he's going to lose. Now, what is it from all of this that you and I need to draw some conclusions? Not everybody in this room is 100-fold Christians. You're not going to be. You don't have to be. That's the beauty of it. You don't have to be a 100-fold Christian to go to heaven. Not everybody in this room tonight is a 5-talent man or a 5-talent woman. And don't take that literally to say you don't have 5 talents. Because I'm sure you do have 5 talents. But in terms of the parable in Matthew 25, you are not a 5-talent Christian. Guess what? You don't have to be a 5-talent Christian. Can I ask you what the master said to the 2-talent man? Did he not say the exact same thing that he said to the 5-talent man? Well done, good and faithful servant. And don't fall into the trap of thinking that the 1-talent man was condemned because he only had 1 talent. Now, I am taking some literary freedom here. But let's rewrite the story. And let's say that the 1-talent man, when the master came home, let's say he has 2 talents. Now let me ask you a question. Do you think the story would read the same way it read for the 5-talent man and the 2-talent man? I don't know why it wouldn't. I don't know why the master, if he's going to look at a 5-talent man that has 10 now and say, well done, and he's going to look at a 2-talent man who now has 4, I have every reason to believe that if he looks at a 1-talent man and perchance he has 2 now, he's going to say the exact same thing. Well done, good and faithful servant. It's not the fact that he only had 1 talent. It's what he done with it, right? It's how he failed to use it to bring glory and honor to the master. We talk about good soul being prepared soul. Prepared soul is prepared to give an account. And what I mean by that is that prepared soul knows that it can yield 30-fold. And it's going to yield 30-fold. And when it comes time to give an account at the harvest, guess what it's ready to do? It's ready to put forth its 30-fold. It doesn't do it arrogantly. It doesn't do it pridefully. It doesn't do it ashamedly while watching the next man bring in 100-fold. What prepared soul does is say, based on my talent and ability set, I had the opportunity to produce 30-fold. Now here's 30-fold. In the same way, the 60-fold ground, and in the same way, the 100-fold. In the same way, when the 5-talent man come, he showed forth his additional 5 talents. When the 2-talent man showed up, he only had 4 when it was done, didn't he? I mean, sure, he doubled, but he had less than the first man when he ended than when the first man started. He hadn't even made it to where the 5-talent man started. He still had less. He didn't come in and say, well, you know, Master, I mean, you only gave me 2 now, as if to make an accusation against the Master. I mean, if you give me more, I'd have done more. I'd have produced more. I would have had more. But you only gave me 2. So I went out and did the best I could. And, well, here's 4. No, he didn't come in like that. He said, you gave me 2. I have 2 more. Here's my 4. In the same way, on Judgment Day, prepared soul says to the God who prepared them, here's the talents and abilities you gave me, and here's how I've used them. And if it's 30, 60, or 100, or if it's 2-5, it is what it is. And God, by your grace and mercy, I'm ready to give an account for the life I've lived with this set of talents and abilities. That's what prepared soul does. It doesn't look around and go, you know, if I could just be like Adam. You know, I'd be the best Christian I could be if God just make me like old Adam. But since I ain't like old Adam, I'm just not, God's blessed him and God didn't bless me, and so because of that, I'll just show God. I'll just sit on my fists and lean back on my thumb, and boy, I hope old Adam does good, boy. Or, you know, well, I'm just kind of a half and half in the middle here somewhere. I'm not 100-fold, I'm not a 30-fold, and I'm not a 1 talent, but I'm not a 5 talent, and I'm. You be the best person you can be right there. I never will forget it. I was sitting in a Bible class in college, and a professor said to us on that day, he said, you bloom where you're planted. And I hope that'll stick with you. You bloom where you're planted. Meaning, could you have a better job? Sure. Could you make more money? Sure. Could you go out and eat lunch with more people? Sure. But are you making the most of the position that you have? Are you doing the best you can with the sphere of influence that you possess? You see, the reality of it is that, no, this good ground was not equally successful. I mean, it wasn't. I mean, some of it yielded 3 times more. But it was equally faithful. Don't you ever forget that. Did the 5-talent man have more than the 2-talent man? Absolutely. They were not equally successful. I don't care if you want to play the numbers game and say, oh, but preacher, you can't do math, and they both doubled, and therefore they ain't both equal. At the end of the day, one had 11 and one had 4. Now, you can write that any way you want to write it, but 11 is always going to be greater than 4. I don't care who you are. They were not equally successful. Were they faithful? According to the Master, they were. They were equally faithful. Yes, sirree. They both got the same reward, according to Matthew 25. Matthew 25 is all about the judgment. You see, the here and now matters when we have our eyes focused on the hereafter. What I'm doing here matters when I realize that I'm going to have to give an account in the hereafter. And excuses, I mean, we ain't got no place for excuses. We ain't got enough time to be making excuses. We ain't got enough time to be belly aching about how somebody's better at something than you are, and to be bemoaning the fact that you don't matter and nobody seems to care about you. And the Lord's church hadn't got time for that. We need everybody to be at their best. I don't ever envision the day of being an elder. I don't envision that day. I want to live that life. And for every man in this room, if you want a set of principles to guide your life by and to be what's pleasing in the eyes of God, read 1 Timothy 3. If you can be that man, whether you're ever an elder or not in the Lord's church, you can go to heaven. I want to be the best I can be. I may never be an elder. I don't really even have aspirations to be an elder in the Lord's church, but I can be faithful where I am. And I can live up to the standard that God has called me to live up to, and so can you. I'll talk about ladies. Look at what it says about elders and deacons' wives. Very little, but look at what it says. Look at what it says in Titus 2 to the older, mature women in the faith. Strive to be able to lead that kind of life. And whether you ever become an elder's wife or not, you can go to heaven. Because you can be faithful. You can be what God wants you to be. And we're not here to compare and classify ourselves. You're just as important to God as the person in the pew in front of you, behind you, to the left of you, or to the right of you. There ain't nobody in this building any more important to God than anyone else. Now, you got a different set of talents and abilities than I've got, and that's without question. You use yours, I'll use mine. We'll be equally faithful, and we'll all go to heaven together. And if you walk in there with 30-fold, you go to heaven. If you walk in there with 60-fold, you go to heaven. If you walk in there with 100-fold, you go to heaven. But if God's expecting 100-fold and you've only got 30 on that day, I don't want to be you. I don't want to be you. If you're a 5-talent person, and when you go in on that day, you've only got 1 talent, I don't want to be you. I don't want to be you. Because there are no excuses, and laziness ain't going to cut it, spiritually speaking, in the Lord's kingdom. It is vital to my ability to help the church grow that you be the best you can be. And it is vital to your ability to help the kingdom increase that I be the best I can be. And until you and I recognize that we influence and affect each other, and we ain't got time to compare and classify. We ain't got time to sit around and count Purple Hall P buckets. What we need to be doing is encouraging each other to be more faithful to the Lord and His church. And I lean on your strengths and you lean on mine. Now that's powerful. And that'll get us all to heaven. And it might just be the case that it'll help somebody else get there. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters. That is all that matters. So quit all this petty business about who you are, who I am, or who he is, or who she is, or I can't do, or you can't do, or they can't do, or I could do better, or they could do better, or you could do better. Or you just do. And when you're asked to do, you do the best you can do. And you do all that you can do. And on that day when the Master comes, you can hear, "Well done, good and faithful servant. That's what we want to hear. If you're here tonight and you wouldn't hear that right now, would you come as we stand and sing?